Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American experience. And I am very excited. I know on hear me say this all the time, but I'm very excited to have Oneil on the podcast. Hello, Oneil. How are you doing? Or should I say bonjour? Or should I say bonsoir? We're not Haitian, but all of the things. How are you?
Bonjour, buenas tardes.
Yeah.
I'm very well, thank you. And hello, everyone who is hearing my voice, and everybody who will listen from across the world. My fans and friends, colleagues from Jamaica, the Caribbean, from France, the French West Indies as well, and from Latin America. Yes, greetings.
Wonderful. All right. So we give the people an introduction to all the languages you can speak. So why don't you tell the community of friends a little bit more about you, Caribbean country you represent, and the work that you do?
All right. So I am Jamaican. I must emphasize I'm very proud of my roots and my heritage. I am a lecturer, linguist, and researcher currently at the Language Teaching and Research Center that is attached to the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies at the University of Technology, Jamaica. I teach academic literacy and French, and I have worked at other institutions, both locally and internationally, where I teach, Spanish related courses, linguistics, culture. I have a research background in technology, in language teaching and learning. I look at artificial intelligence. I look at gamification as well. I look at Jamaican language, Jamaican Creole. I'm not a Creole linguist per se, but I take interest in Creole as a less commonly taught language. Outside of academia, I am a seasoned columnist with the Jamaica Observer. I have a space in the paper on a Friday where I talk about national issues to current affairs, social issues, and I touch on things happening internationally as well. I also work as a freelance journalist with the Jamaica Observer outside of being a columnist. I am an author as well, and I love traveling. So I always say, even though I'm a linguist on the applied side, so an applied linguist, but I see myself more as an intercultural specialist because I really like, going around, visiting different countries, meeting different people, learning about their backgrounds and what makes them unique. So yeah, those are some of the things that define what I do.
The list long, and
Yeah.
I'm not surprised because you're a Jamaican. you know.
Yes.
I am excited, and so for the audience, everything that you said is kind of grounding us in the conversation we want to have today. Well, I've been wanting to have, and it's about language. And so before we get into that conversation, talk to me about why you chose to focus in this area, linguistics, all of that. Talk to me about it.
All right. I knew from I was exposed to Spanish first in first form in high school, and in second form, I was exposed to French because at that time where I did my secondary education, depending on your average in first form, you were streamed in second form, and the stream groups got the opportunity to do French. And so I just felt like, and this is something that we looked at in research, and I've tested it, I've been lecturing for 10 years, that when you have a teacher who is passionate and enthusiastic about what they do, they kind of have that influence on you. So I feel like though those teachers who I had in my foundation years contributed to, me pursuing languages. And it's another way of seeing the world. And so I enjoy what I do. And the funny thing is, when I got to upper school in fifth form, my clearest pathway was through the languages. So my top grades were in English, French, and Spanish. And so I knew that that was the route I was going to take. What field? Would it be, in education? Would it be in international relation? I eventually decided to go to Teachers College, and I met some wonderful lecturers there as well. And in that space, in my third year, we had the opportunity to go to France. Well, I majored in French, I minored in Spanish. So based on your major, you would either go to France or Panama at the time. So interestingly, my Spanish was much better than my French. And I thought that I wanted to bring my French to my Spanish level, but I ended up, just, French just escalated like that to the point where I went back to France after my undergrad. I spent 7 years. So I'm fully fluent, native level in French. And I am wrapping up my doctoral dissertation and I'm writing it in French. Yes.
Are you them say bright? But side note, Moa ask you, which part of Jamaica you come from?
I am from the cool hills of Tower Hill in Mavis Bank. That's where the coffee factory is.
Okay.
Yes. So that's in East Rural, St. Andrew. I'm from. I'm a country boy. I'm a proud.
But listen. We country people unite, because whenever me tell anybody me come from Jamaica, I say where you come from, Mobi. Oh, country. Me say it's a second city. All right, calm your nerves. But me proud of the title still. But lovely. All right. So I wanted to have this conversation. Two inciting events. So I'm in a WhatsApp group, and someone in the group shared the link that there's the New York City housing website had the ability to translate what was on the website to Patois. And so there was this conversation how it feel unprofessional and a bunch of stuff, right? And to me personally, what I find is challenging is the conversation around colonialism, what is proper, and all of that. I don't have a problem with the official city website with the patois, and in terms of unprofessional. Carrie-Ann personally feels some type of way. So the AI, I use the language because one of the superpowers that I have, and people are always amazed, is when I speak so nicely and then me just drop in at the patois and they're like, oh my God, what is that? Mr. Norman, this is a superpower, this. And so what I feel very attached to is particularly language has become my identity. So when I left good Mount Alvernia and come America to live, right? And then went back to Jamaica, my cousin them said, my God, you talk, what's that way you live here, right? Because in the diaspora, language becomes a central part of identity. So you hold on to it. Like when I met my uncles, when I moved here, my uncles had been in America donkey years. They say just donkey years. And then as Louise Bennett said, no little twang, never in there, right? And so now I'm at the age where they were when I first came, and I'm like, my God, I have some twang, but if I'm in community. So part of my concern is, what does it mean when AI and all these other people have access to language, whereas before, and I want to read something from Miss Lou's Aunt Rochi said, when we can talk and we can go fast and we can go slow and we don't want nobody understand what we say, all of these things, right? And so so those are the two inciting things. And then third, my challenge with this push to translate everything into Patois is that, and this is where we're going to probably be a little boundary pushing. We are fluent in Patois, but we may be illiterate in reading and writing it, because we know that there's an appreciation of it. There's no codification of the proper way to spell a word, right? There's variations of how some people want to say gal versus gal or gue or whatever it is, right? And later down in the after show, I'll read from Miss Aunt Rochi, Miss Lou, which I have right here. it is difficult to read patois and read it in a way that's fluent. And I think that's also part of the adjustment in the identity. Like, you are fluent in it, but you may be illiterate because you can't read it as well as you speak it or write it. So I know as a journalist, you're going to say, my girl, you just gave a very long backstory. Cut. Me need for answer. But I just wanted to set it up, so. What are your thoughts about languages and identity and the properness of patois being translated and all of that?
All right. I think you've said quite some interesting things, and the question that you just asked is very pertinent, very relevant in the Jamaican context and also in the diaspora. Language is identity. And as somebody who is multilingual, I can tell you that whenever I speak French, I feel very French. I wasn't born French. I was born in a Francophone country, but I feel very French. And when I speak in English or Jamaican, I feel very Jamaican. And language is a way of life. It's a way of thinking. And which is why when we get into translations, for example, and given that it's within my scope, I know it very well, some ideas are very difficult to translate because they're from a cultural perspective. And some are not translatable at all. And so you find that language is identity. And which is why sometimes, and identity and heritage and solidarity, which is why I think for you, when you go into a foreign country and you meet up with people from where you're from, that's kind of solidarity comes in. It's like you can't have a full conversation just in standard English. Some amount of patois must drop in the conversation.
Listen, my friend in Jamaica, he says anytime a Jamaican come on the show, you cannot contain the patois. It just bursts, right? Even on the road, you just like we went to Hershey Park and there's the young lady was navigating us to the shuttle bus to the parking lot. And me just hear she say a word. I mean, know so she a Jamaican and me just start talk to her at the same time.
Yes. So it identifies who you are. So to some extent, we do have an accent as Jamaican, so you're able to identify that as well. And so it is important for us. We're living in a time, especially the decade 2022 to 2032, the United Nations has declared that decade as the decade of indigenous languages. So they're calling for us to promote indigenous languages, languages that are endangered. And so it's a critical point that we're at regarding language transition and the Jamaican patois. And I remember when one time I was in France, I was with another Jamaican, and we were there because sometimes you want to say some things, and everybody understand what you're saying. And so I remember we're code switching a lot. And this young lady, she just kept looking at us. Afterwards, we asked her if she understood. She said a few things. It happened that she was from either Martinique or Guadeloupe. So she was able to follow certain things. And then we were like, we have to be very careful, because you just don't know who may be understanding what you're saying. And so it gives you that, I'm just saying that superpower when you're in certain spaces, you want to communicate certain things, you want to send certain messages. It's just like you can't give certain jokes in standard English because they will not have the effect that you want them to have. You can't express certain things in standard English. When you draw for a Jamaican reference, the message goes home. And which is why, as a linguist, I am big on, I know it's a touchy debate, but I am one of those people who believe that children should be educated in their mother language. So if we're going to go bilingual route, let's go that route. Teach them in English, teach them in Jamaican Creole, because intelligence is not a matter of whether you speak standard English or not. Intelligence is a matter of comprehension. And children need to comprehend, they need to understand what is being transmitted onto them. And because of language perception over the many decades and years, it's really stifled a lot of Jamaicans. I remember when I was doing a master's thesis in France, I was looking at teaching English as a second language in Jamaica. And it did not dawn on me until that point, I was in my early 20s, that I was actually bilingual. As an adult, it was my supervisor, who is French, who said to us, or it was with my other Jamaican friend, but you guys are bilingual. And that shifted everything. Everything for me.
Listen, the minute I came to America and the reception to the way that I spoke compared to how I was groomed to speak in high school in Jamaica, I recognized that, I have this other language. And even the way that I can express that, you know, and that's part of why a lot of times my friends, they will say, Carrie, where you get these words from? I go back and use words that they won't, like most commonly won't use. No, they're words that my grandmother and older people would use because I recognize that they are in danger of being of being lost. So I use it. So sometimes and then I love the proverbs. So like I was telling my friend, we were talking and I said, little pig have big ears. And she's like, what? I'm gonna say the pitney I listen.
Yeah.
So it's like even in that way, just using language, and I am this entire show, is a evolution of how I even embrace that language. Because in the beginning, I was like, "Welcome," and I was all tone and twanging, and now I'm like, "Yeah, everybody, wagwan," and and the other story that incited me to start the podcast, I was interviewing a young man for a position. And one of the questions, some standard question, your weakness and your strength. And he said his weakness was his accent. And I went through the interview, and at the end, as I was walking him through the door, I was like, your accent is not a weakness at all. And now, I mean, look how much money them up here, Hollywood actors, we try to get with accent and we have it, So I love that. I want to double click into something what you said. 2022 to 2032, the decade of indigenous language. Why make? Everyone, this is a language show, so we're going to be switching because I'm bilingual and he's trilingual, or at least I know a five language, right? So why did the UN designate the decade of indigenous language?
All right. So from memory, a lot of languages go extinct very often by the day. And so it's projected, I don't remember the time frame, but very soon, maybe like half of the number of languages that we have will just they will just disappear. And so in order to strengthen that and to preserve language, the UN says, let us, pilot some projects. Let us do everything that we can to promote. Let's look at language policies in schools, in communities, how we can preserve these languages. And also to the point where there are still many countries where people are illiterate because they are not being taught in the language that they know. And that's troubling for me. Now, I speak different languages and I know the English language very well. But again, a lot of people identify or, they look at the correlation between intelligence and speaking the English language. And I'm like, for me, that's not a marker of being bright. So, which is why that the young man that you interviewed, it is one of the things that people struggle with, that they've always been spoken to about their accent, so they feel like it's a barrier, that it's a weakness, when, listen, that's how you speak. And I remember, learning different languages, and because I'm native level in French, sometimes I'm asked the question, have you ever, attempted to speak like the French? I'm like, listen, I am not French. So I'm not going to put on an accent to sound French. If that's your, if that's your objective, fine. I will not say don't, but you're going to hear that I am not a native speaker. So it's interesting because as I said, I travel a lot. And I remember one time I was coming back to Jamaica on a flight beside this guy. I think he's Francophone, either from France or Belgium. And came to Mobay. We ended up coming into Kingston together. So we went to the bus station to get the bus to come into Kingston. And he asked me something in English. But I'm very much French. So the French just came out. I responded to him in French. And he's like, what? So we started having a conversation about French. And then he's trying to understand where I was from. Because he thought, of course, I was Francophone. But I have a slight accent, so I'm not French. And then I was like, I'm Jamaican. And he's like, that's not possible. I was like, I'm very much Jamaican. I still started asking how I learned French and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not trying to hide my identity, so I'm not going to imitate an accent because it is who I am. So people need to embrace their accents, their languages. And it's interesting that, how things become extinct, how languages become extinct because we give, precedence to the dominant languages that are used across the world. Before you know it, I don't classify Jamaican Creole as an endangered language because a lot of us speak it. I don't see it, going
That
anywhere.
was my next question. Like,
It's not going anywhere. It's not
okay,
going anywhere. But, because I look at minority languages across the board, even though I don't specialize in out of minority languages, but it's one of the realities that, some of these languages are becoming extinct. And I have colleagues across the world, I was at a conference recently working with colleagues who teach Maltese language, who teach the one in Ireland. What's that called?
is it Gaelic?
Right, Irish and Gaelic, right. So I have colleagues who are working with those minority languages to promote those languages so that, they can have bilingual education as well, because that's how we're going to, have the languages continue and not die out, because so much culture and so much history and literature is attached to a language. So it's not just grammar and vocabulary, but again, identity, culture, so much that you can learn about generations when you pass on native languages.
I want to come back to this idea of literacy. And I mean, you're going to talk about the Jamaican context, but I have kids who are born in America, and I remember um a cousin, she's technically my mother cousin, but we are Jamaican.
Yeah.
No second, third, a cousin, right? And I was talking to my kids, and but I taught the pattern. She said, they understand what you say. I said, they know most what other language we are talking at the house, right? To the point that when they're ready, they start to make fun. Like, this is mommy when she wants you to do something. Me say fi put it on. you know, like they understand it now. You know that they're not native speakers because you hear that American twang with it, but they understand it. And I think, you know, throughout the time of doing the show, a lot of second generation Jamaican Americans, they often find people tell them that they're not Jamaican because you can hear even though they can speak and they know the patois, you still hear that American twang in there, and they kind of feel insecure about it. So when it comes to, I guess this plays into literacy because there's this aspect of I don't know what's the right word, like this self-awareness and insecurity about how you're coming off, whether you're doing it right, and how does that tie into actually literacy, reading it, writing it, that's one, and maybe what the movement is, but comprehension, I don't necessarily think, at least from, is the bigger issue, because most people comprehend it is like, how do you read and begin to write and communicate maybe more effectively in your native language, if that makes sense.
Right. And you're doing a good thing. It. I was pleased that I was working in France because I worked in foreign languages unit, and so I've had students who they are coming from a bilingual or a multilingual background in terms of their parents and their generations. But their parents never communicated to them in the language of the parents. So imagine you live in France, you're learning English, but your parents are from Spain and Italy. And you have to learn Italian and Spanish in school because your parents never spoke those languages at home. I'm like, I think your parents who do that, they're robbing their children of a very important asset that they need to have.
Yes, and both can be true. What I learned particularly from Haitian guests, and I remember this woman who's Jamaican, like her she wasn't on the show, but I had a conversation with her. She wasn't allowed to talk patois. And I think a lot of that had to do with their immigration experience when they came here. They did not want their children to have to deal with any of the discrimination or bullying that happened. So some of that is because of fear and you know, the culture at the time when they migrated. You know, it was cool to be Jamaican in the 90s, but before that, you know, or maybe with Jamaicans, but before that, the prior generation had they were trying to blend in, and that was part of the reason why that a lot of people just did not teach their kids the language or forbade them. They could communicate in the house, but forbade them from speaking it. So I just wanted to share that. Those are some of the stories that I've heard. But not
Absolutely.
today. We could
Yeah, not today.
talk.
Not today. Not
Not
today.
today.
Because
Yes.
it's a very important asset to have. And just to tie that with research, since I'm also a research has shown that, you know, people who are bilingual, multilingual, they tend to, you know, have fewer effects of dementia when they get old. So, because there's a linguistic gymnastic that is taking place. So your brain is active and that continues until you get old. So there are cognitive and health benefits and intellectual benefits too when you are multilingual. Now, back to the matter, you know, self-awareness, perception, literacy. Um, I I remember in undergrad, and funny enough, this happened earlier on today. I went to see one of my students by the food court, and this other student came by buying something. So my student and I were talking, and then he was like, "Where are you from? You speak with an accent." "Oh, you Jamaican?" I'm like, and I get this question quite often for some strange reason. I remember in undergrad, I was hosting a radio program, and I was communicating Jamaican from time to time, and then my friends would be WhatsApping me and be like, "Madden, stick to your English." And I'm like, guys, I'm Jamaican as well. Like, allow me to express myself using the Jamaican language. And so some people feel like I don't understand it and master it, but I can tell you that I know more Creole than you because I studied these things, you know? So it's a matter of accepting that language comes with accents and variations. We're not all going to speak the same way. And we have to really move away from the notion of, you know, being this bad patois or this bad English. So we have to appreciate diversity and variations. The point about, I think you probably referring to, you know, non-standardization of the Jamaican language. Now, The Jamaican language has gone through decades of codification, and currently the most popular model that is used is called the Cassidy model, and that the Jamaican language unit at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Kingston, they have done a lot of work on, having a standard for the Jamaican language. Is it well known? No. And that's one of the conversations I keep having with my colleagues that, listen, we need to get it in the teachers' colleges, because if the teachers are the ones who are going to interact with the students the most, we need to have our teachers at least do an elective course in Jamaican language so that they can pass it on when they go into the system. So I remember having this conversation very recently, because if we're moving, I don't know at what point, but I know that at least one political party has suggested that they would officialize Jamaican Creole were they to form the next government. But officialization comes with a lot of work. It comes with a lot of funding, because all the documentation will have to be,
We have
in
to
both
transcribe
languages and all of that stuff.
signs, road
Yeah,
sign, all of these things.
yeah. But there is a model that is used, and it is the model that has been used to translate the New Testament into Jamaican Creole. So for me, it's not a fair conversation. I know that more awareness needs to take place, but I often hear it, and people's like, "Oh, you call for officialization when there's no standard for Creole." I was like, there is a standard, again, that is not widely known, but it needs to be known. And because Patois has been an oral language for the most part, where we spell it based on our phonemic awareness, our own phonetics, and you see those variations, and people like, which is why it's hard to read. Like, especially in the codified version, it's hard to read.
Let me tell you, that Jamaican New Testament, I was reading it and I say, I would never spell this word this way. But, it was the good thing about it, which I love about the Bible app personally, is that you can play and follow along
Yeah.
with it. And so that makes the comprehension or the reading of it much better and the get familiar with the words. But when we saw this, everybody in the family, because we were sitting down and, I was telling my niece and my brother-in-law that, yes, there's a New Testament. I told my coworker about it. And then we hit play and it says, I can't remember, First John. Forget
Yes,
how
yes,
they
that's
spell
right.
John,
Yeah,
right? And the dramatization in the Bible app and just like reading along, everybody was like, Jano, this a version of the Bible, the New Testament, much more engaging
yeah,
than the regular English version. And that is a testament to what happens once we get comfortable. Because again, all of us in that space were recognizing our limitations in reading it because the way it was presented in the app is not how, like you said, we would phonetically, write this word. Like, I can't even tell you how much word we say. What?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would if I would never spell it this way if I were spelling it. So I think that comes back to what I think a lot of people are struggling with. It's like, how do I begin to read and understand this? And of course, everything is not well funded to the point where, if I want to understand it, I can just follow along and listen to the Bible app read to me. So I feel like the next question becomes, where where do we Jamaicans, not just Jamaicans at Jamaica, but Jamaicans abroad, where do we go from here? Because, yeah, like you said, it's been an oral language. My grandmother passed away, so we would never be able to teach her this new version of it because she. So where do we go from here? And I know that the language Jamaican language set. We don't have time
Yeah.
to worry about that for a while. But how do we get to a place where I want my kids to now be fully bilingual, that they can read and write and understand what's going on? Where do we go from here? And then I want to switch to the AI thing.
Right. So the pilot programs have been done by the Jamaican Language Unit and other faculties at the UE Mona for sure in primary schools. And the results have shown that, students were able to distinguish between Jamaican and English language. So again, funding is needed. Capacity building is needed. We're going to need more teachers being familiarized with the system that UE has been proposing. But it also takes, a shift in focus, because one of the things that we struggle with as a people is like, yeah, why we are push patois if we're not even master English? You always get that. You always get that. And patois is not going anywhere because English is the international language of communication and business and all the work. And only to realize that, English is a very difficult language. It's a language that, it has some weird rules, some weird patterns. And just like any other language, it has gone through its processes to become what it is today. But it's sometimes difficult to argue with people who are non-linguists or language enthusiasts, because they're not seeing it from our perspective. That the linguists, my colleagues, they've done the work. They have done the work, but there's not much appreciation for the work because it's always been an oral language, and they've tried to put a system in place to codify it. You don't think it sounds like how you would spell it, so you can't accept it. Like, there's so many things in English language that we just work with. Why do we say preached, but teach taught?
Or like one sheep, two sheep.
Yeah.
Or read and read.
Yeah.
Same spelling, is just, a lot of things. And I remember a few jobs ago, I worked with some colleagues where English wasn't their native language. And they said it was just the most difficult language to learn because, as you said, there are all these rules. And then, based on where you are, pronunciation is different. Like, I live in America and I can tell where someone comes from based on the way they speak and how they pronounce certain words. Go on social media, everybody says not plantain, is plantain, right? And I said, okay, let's use the same structure. Do you say mountain? No, you say mountain. And you don't say curtain, you say curtain. So, why do we use plantain, if you're using that, or fountain, right? So I think I love and appreciate language. Even before I moved here, like we all had to learn, in my generation. And I think even my mother's generation, when she went to high school, Miss Lou's poems, right? And I think maybe that's what I got growing up, that I grew up in a time when Miss Lou was still active and visible and very, a very staunch supporter or representative of the language, and the beautiful way that she would speak and perform in our language. And we all looked up to her, right, as an example. And I think maybe that is not something that, even though everybody up on social media, we maybe not have someone who feels the same way about the language that she did, and leave a mark on a generation of people. And then and maybe also it's my own personal experience with how people react to me and the way that I speak, to say that if you think so become me that talk patois, me less educated, that's a your problem, not mine. and just all these perceptions, and living in New York City and hearing the different accents. Do you think someone who speaks with an Italian accent is less educated? Like, you hear Italian, I could tell an Irish person accent, especially if they come from Boston.
Mhm.
If someone is from Deep South versus, like, it doesn't, and I don't know where that comes from. I think that's a bigger issue with the English language generally. Um, but that's all. We're going off into another end. But I'm loving this conversation, and there's a lot. So I'm gonna jump to the AI part where I feel like, say, like, should
Yeah.
I be worried to AI that
Hold
come?
on. Before you get there, I also want to point out that, outside of the education sector, like people in media, they have a huge responsibility as well, to promote programs, have programs in Jamaican. Because the more we hear it, I think the more we will have an appreciation for it. So read the news in Jamaican. And again, I'm going back to native language and comprehension. Because when you listen to some people, how they interpret what was said on the news, you wonder if you and them listen to the same news.
Let me
But
tell
if
you.
they were if it was said, like you said, the patois version of the New Testament. Oh, as a religious person too, I read different versions of the Bible, and you have appreciation for different versions, whether it's the the
And
NIV.
and I like NLT, but some things you can't read it in NLT. You can
Right,
only read the 23rd Psalm in KJV version because
right.
it sounds a certain way.
Yeah,
I think I like that example because it's a perfect way. Some verses in the Bible, KJV. Don't go with NIV or NLT because it just sound a different way.
yeah. And it doesn't give you the message, some things and words very, very powerful. And which is why I tell my students all the time, and even when in my columns, when I'm very deliberate, I'm very intentional with my word choice because it sends the message that I wanted to say. Now, when you read the New Testament in Jamaican, you get the imagery deeper than with the English versions. So the story is not lost on you. And again, when you get that inner language that you understand very well, it stays with you much longer than in a foreign language.
Listen, I'm reading the Bible in chronological order. I cannot wait to get to the New Testament because I am reading it all Jamaican Patois, which I don't know. I guess the whole Testament part is going to take a while, but I really appreciate. I'm really enjoying this language. I this conversation on language because I'm not a linguist, but when I tell you I love my language and culture, I love it. So now let's get to the AI part where we do well with the worry about AI. I taught Jamaican, but even before that, I sent you the article with the BBC and how the young kids are reclaiming the language. And in addition to AI being able to talk Jamaican, I've seen social media posts where this woman, she's in the UK, they were hiring people to talk Jamaican. And then you have people who are worried about the language being taken away. Well, you and I have just discussed that the language is not going away, but we kind of feel away when people who don't really come from the language or speak the language. I did not say this. The BBC article did say this. May put that as a preference. I'm not nobody come for me. The Jamaican language has become a central part of the linguistic fabric of Toronto. If I were in Toronto, I would say Toronto because
Right.
that's how they say it. It's now widely spoken by people who have no ethnic or heritage connection to Jamaica. Most recently, reignited by Toronto, see the pato they try come out, the Toronto rapper native Drake. So we have two things where people are, there's there's this aspect of AI coming, and what does this mean? Everybody go talk patois, and this idea that it's ours and we want to hold on to it and we want to gatekeep it and guard it. So there's a lot that's happening in there. On one hand, I want gatekeep me on nobody take it. But on the other hand, there's this AI thing that potentially could be helpful. But as I've seen in this age of technology enhancement, fly the gate is not, what's the word? There's a danger in a fly the gate and let everybody come in with it. So what are your thoughts on that? But just I gonna leave it right here. So
A very interesting question. So with the propagation of AI, which is not new, I remember when ChatGPT came about in November 2022, a lot of concerns were raised. And I remember I was one of the columnists locally who said, listen, I'm in language education. We've always been using artificial intelligence. We've always been using Google Translates and other things. So it's really not new. So I wasn't concerned about, you know, the threads, what's the future of education would look like. And there have been so many evolutions. When cell phones came about, Mark, I think it did before I came, at sense, but there people were skeptical about it as well, and it's become a useful tool. And so I think we have to look at the positive side because one, again, language is culture. And a lot of people for the longest while who are non-Jamaicans have wanted to understand what the dancehall songs and the reggae songs are saying. So now they can do this independently. I remember one of my friends from Mayotte in one of those African countries. He was asking me, what this Spice song is saying? Spice can be very, raunchy in some of her lyrics. And I'm like, bro, what kind of song you listen to? Anyway, I told him what the song meant. So they're listening to these songs. They look up to a lot of our artists. And so I think it now gives them a space independently to be able to research and get an understanding of what they're intaking. Uh, and I think when more people have an appreciation for the language, it's even greater potency for us to officialize the language. So, there are many benefits to it. One of the things that I found striking some years ago when another petition was done to officialize the Jamaican language, when you looked at those who signed the petition, most of them were non-Jamaican and non-Jamaican linguists. A lot of people who are in my discipline, some reputable linguists calling for the officialization of the Jamaican language because they understand the benefits and the agency that come with knowing a language. And so you realize that there are not, I would not say a lot more, but many non-Jamaicans appreciate the language more than those native speakers do, which is, it is contradictory. So I feel like it's good that we have, these platforms. Google Translate does have Jamaican language as well. ChatGPT now has Jamaican language. So there are areas to tighten, of course, and I think who knows, very soon they may be using the custody model to do the translations. And so it provides avenues because now that it becomes the standardized part is there, it opens jobs opportunities for people. So you will have official patois translators and interpreters who can do things. And it helps. I remember I was traveling recently and this has happened a lot during my travels where I've had to interpret for people. I was traveling to Mexico recently and there was this Asian maybe he was Chinese, was going to Dummer, and he understood barely anything in English, much less to understand anything in Spanish. So I stood there at immigration, at customs, just to help him out. So imagine being in a context where the Jamaican language is the language that is needed to be used. And, whomever is there is able to provide that sort of agency to help somebody else. So I think it's very useful. And through those media too, us as native speakers will learn more about the language because we don't know everything. So
I do appreciate the idea of having a translator because my daughter told a story like when she was younger and she was working at one of those chain restaurants you sit down and eat. This Jamaican lady in our family was ordering and her coworkers didn't understand what they wanted. And so they called my daughter, who she's not a native speaker. She born here, but because she bilingual, because she live in the house, she was able to translate and take the lady order. Because the lady attack, she's like, "Mommy, the lady so like she come from Kingston," which she would know because as her parents, I tell her that I have an idea of which part of Jamaica people come
yeah,
from based on how they speak, and she translated that. But also on a more somber note, like when my grandmother, who lived in Jamaica until like maybe 2003 fully, and then she had a stroke, and at one point she had to go into the hospital. She was thriving and recovering and she wasn't in a place where a lot of Jamaicans and West Indians live, right? She was in the Midwest. And so there are not too many people who are there. But she was thriving when the person who was on her rotation to take care of her was Jamaican. And so she would be able to understand. And so I found that when she was communicating with them, they would not understand. So what happened was she stopped talking. And because she stopped talking, they took that as a cue that she wasn't being responsive. And it wasn't the case. Because when I was there, when we had to finally make the decision to put her on hospice care, this doctor was telling me she's not responsive. I'm like, I went in there and I was talking to her and she responded. But because you all aren't understanding what she's saying,
mhm,
even though she's talking English, because my grandmother, she talked English, but there's a slight accent there. They weren't taking the time to one, and my grandmother comes from a generation where they're kind of soft spoken and they're a different way. And, it would have been very helpful for someone who would be able to understand. And I play this in my head sometime. I was like, maybe if she had the stroke in New York, she'd have recovered fine because we'd have put her in one of the hospital them here. And even when it wasn't like my mom and my uncles couldn't visit her, but the nurses, the healthcare professions are around her all the time, right? So you need someone who's able to kind of understand, even, for instance, my grandmother, typical grandma language. Boy, I was handing out the flyer and the guy didn't take it. I feel cute. You know, you and I know what she means by she
yeah,
feel cute. Somebody else would be like, what are you
yeah.
talking about? Right? Or I had this experience and another guest had this experience where I was in high school and somebody was offended by something that I did. I said, but me tell her, osh. And the girl did
But
the she was like, she took it to be, be quiet. And
yeah,
that's not what I meant. Osh is our way of saying sorry. And um another guest came on the show and said when he came to go to college in Georgia and he told somebody, "Osh," the girl was about to ready to light him up, and then he realized that, oh, something is
yeah.
wrong. And even more recently at work, I was sitting on a call and I was talking to a colleague and I was like, "Me feel like a donut," and he looked at me like, I don't know what that. And then I saw his face and I corrected myself and I said, "I feel like having a donut." Uh, He was like, "Oh, I wasn't sure if you physically felt like a donut." So I think there is a really strong argument for the interpreters because, like you said, there's some things that even with AI, there's context
Yeah.
that it may not be able to pick up. Like, I feel like a donut, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
or cute.
The disadvantages we've looked at in language learning and the absence of is the cultural nuance that these large language models are not able to pick up on, and so you're going to need people to do that for you. And again, language provides agency and access. Now imagine going into a context you are not well, but you speak Jamaican. That's the only language you're able to express whatever you're going through, but your medical practitioner doesn't understand. It has implications. You go into a court system, and that's one of the things we're lobbying for in Jamaica as well, where you're speaking the King's English and you want the client to understand exactly what's happening. So we need to provide spaces where the language can be used so people leave with the correct understanding and interpretation. You use these milady and the jargon, the legal jargon that can become so cumbersome. It's not helping the average Creolophone speaker.
Creolophone speaker. I'm a Creolophone speaker. No, I know we could go on and on. So when it comes to the diaspora, we talk about how the language begins to evolve because you have Jamaican and then you have New York language speak and all of this wrap up and mix up. What does that mean in terms of linguistic terms? Is it just um the way in Spanish you have, Spanish from Spain versus Latin? Is that where we are when it comes to Jamaican language?
Absolutely. It happens in every language. It's what we call sociolinguistics. So you look at the social context attached to the language, which is why people from St. Elizabeth have a particular type of patois versus those from Mobay, which you're from the West,
Yes.
And I think Mobay uses they.
When
Well, yeah.
they
So, like a person from Kingston would not use that. So you can identify certain regions based on, these little inserts that they use and certain things that they use to designate certain objects as well. Yeah, it's like calling Dandishan the what's it?
sight and sight.
Sightings or something like that. So you could be in the same country with different parishes and somebody says sightings and they'll be like, huh? What is that? He's like, you never used to speak sightings in the primary school. And you're like, what is that? So you start to explain it and be like, oh, down the shandy. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, we call it sight and sight,
just at first met your sight and sight.
Yeah, sight and sight, we call it. At least my generation. Call my husband right now. Dandy Shandy is like, no, this Dandy Shandy, isn't that a drink? So you have some of that. And even, in this age we're in where you have pronouns, Jamaicans been using them,
Oh, yeah.
long time, so it's so interesting how we use them to pluralize, just different things.
And him to talk about a female too.
Yeah, yeah. Or, just the way that, again, context and region, you know somebody will come from St. Thomas, St. Elizabeth, Kingston. Like, I think Kingstonians, depending on where you are in Kingston, you speak um almost in a sing-songy type way if you come from a
Mhm.
certain part of Kingston versus other people. But this is what I love about our language, and that's so fascinating because if you're not from Jamaica you wouldn't even realize that these are like nuances that happen on the island itself. And so I'm gonna wrap it up because I don't want to keep you, although I feel like me need to break for something else. So let me look. So, what's the one takeaway you want people have when it comes to, you know, the Jamaican language justice, in terms of, you know, our language is for everyone, and whether you're you're poor or you're rich, we need to make sure that, the citizens of our country are able to represent themselves and speak in a way that is familiar to them and that be acceptable, right? It's not that they can't do it. It's just not acceptable in some places, right? And yeah, what's your words? Because this is evolving, so there's no final word. So what's your thoughts as of today? Because next week a whole different story.
Yeah. All right. Languages agency. And in a country like Jamaica, where the national language is Jamaican Creole, majority of the population speaks. Why is it not an official language? One, and we need to provide, you know, avenue spaces where people are able to express themselves in their native language without feeling like they're being discriminated against or that they're unintelligent because they do not speak the dominant language, the language of instruction, or the posh language, which is English. We should accommodate people. We should accommodate people. And it's one of the conversations that I've raised based on my recent research articles. How, as a person who teaches English language academic literacy, how do we facilitate that in our courses as well? And how do my colleagues that teach English language across the education system, how do they feel about incorporating Jamaican Creole in the education system? That's a conversation we need to have. We need to not see Jamaican language as bad English because it affects, how people feel about themselves. I have had students who have told me, sir, I'm very, very conscious when I have to speak standard English because they don't want to make any mistake and they don't want to come off with an accent and that kind of stuff. But we need, at the same time, Creole is looked upon as, informal and you're uneducated. So we need to strike a balance because if you're going to be fearful of speaking English because you don't want to make mistake and it's not your native language. So why are we not embracing our native language? On a more international scale, I feel with the continuous, evolution of artificial intelligence and technology in general, it will provide scope for people to have access and agency. The justice system needs to be more accommodative. I remember at UTech we had a lecture recently, and it was a lawyer who has a PhD in linguistics. So her background is very interesting. So she looks at legal justice from a a linguistic perspective in the Caribbean. And so I raised some other points. You go into the court system, are we accommodating the average Creole speaker in an English court system? Are we accommodating our native Jamaican children in a language that they understand? And again, which is our promoting bilingual education, because we see in the national and regional exams each year that our students do not perform well in English language and in mathematics too. And I feel like if they're taught in a language that they understand, again, comprehension, then it could yield greater results. So I want to commend my colleagues, my Creole linguists in Jamaica and the Caribbean and elsewhere who are putting in the work. I do my advocacy through, fora like this one, and also through my writings and research so that we can continue to elevate the conversation. But most importantly, I feel like a lot of work needs to come from governance of the country. Because if they push it, then we will reach, a greater level in terms of what you want.
Thank you for that. Something else came to me that I guess a question: does the Jamaican language unit have a dictionary? Because somebody said something the other day. Somebody sent me a joke, and I said, "What really does bilias mean?" Like, I want to. I got it from the context, but it's almost like, where did this word derive from? Because if you look up our English language, it tells us origin and all of that stuff, right? And it would be so cool for us to have something similar. So I'm just curious if there's any of that in the
There
works.
is, there is. So it's ongoing. I know Joseph Farquharson from the Jamaican Language
Um,
Unit. He posts these words maybe weekly, at least a word, a Jamaican word on LinkedIn. So I know he and others are working on a dictionary. And interestingly, based on my recollection, the dictionary will have the Jamaican word, then it will have the translations in English and maybe French and Spanish.
mm, that's
So
like
we're
nice.
getting to places. We're getting to places. And the language is so rich and dynamic, it's hard to keep up with
I know.
because our social linguistics is very colorful.
Of-
Everyone is like, and because, you know, you have to contend with pop culture every day. So you have to contend with dancehall music, reggae music every day. And everything, every new movement brings about new terminologies that you have to try to keep up with. So it's very interesting.
And the other, so we have another show called Reels and Rhythms, and we were reviewing rockers from the 70s, and we're just like, Rastafarianism brought a whole nother level of words to what
Yes.
we kind of use. Like, instead of understand is overstand.
Yeah.
You know, even the other day I was talking to my friend. I don't know if this is a thing. And he said, Kerry, you know, I don't appreciate you. I appreciate love you. I was just
Oh, yeah.
like, so it's all these ways that our culture is dynamic, it's rich, it's evolving, and I am so grateful to have this conversation. I hope you come back and tell me whatever else is going on and we can chat. But I'll put where people can find you in the show notes, and we're not going to be done. We're going at the show notes. I'm going to ask some other question, and I might read what Aunt Rochi say. So as I love to say at the end of every episode, what good?